Now we're going to look at probability. To start out with, we'll look at some definitions. A probability experiment is an experiment in which the outcomes occur randomly. In other words, we can't predict the outcome before it happens. An event is an outcome or set of outcomes from a probability experiment. The sample space is the set of all possible outcomes from a probability experiment. For example, if you roll the die, the sample space would be the numbers 1 through 6. There are several ways to calculate probabilities. One way is using the empirical probability rule. The probability of an event E is the number of ways that E can occur divided by the total number of possible outcomes in the sample space. Keep in mind this formula only works when each outcome in the sample space has the same likelihood of occurring. Let's look at an example. Suppose we roll 2 dice. What is the probability of getting a sum of 7? All right? So basically what we're doing there is we're looking at all the possible ordered pairs that are in the sample space and counting how many of them would give us a sum of 7. Now, just to give you a better idea for this sample space, the ordered pair 1, 2 represents a 1 on the first die and a 2 on the second die. 1, 6 is 1 on the first die, 6 on the second die. Now, 2, 1 is a 2 on the first die and a 1 on the second die. There are 36 of those ordered pairs because there are 6 possibilities for each die. And using the fundamental counting principle, 6 times 6 is 36. 6 of those ordered pairs will give us a sum of 7. 1 and 6, 6 and 1, 2 and 5, 5 and 2, 3 and 4, 4 and 3. So the probability using the empirical probability formula is 6 out of 36, which is 1/6. We always reduce our fractions. All right, well, let's look at an example of what would happen if the outcomes were not equally likely. Suppose that we looked at this experiment not in terms of ordered pairs, in terms of what happens on each die, but in terms of the sums. There are 11 possible sums when you roll 2 dice, 2 up through 12. If you looked at this and applied the empirical probability rule, you might say the probability of getting a 7, that is a sum of 7, equals 1 out of the total number of possible outcomes, which is 11. Now, that really doesn't make sense because we know that's wrong. But this is a misapplication of the empirical probability rule. The problem is, in this sample space, right here, the set of all possible outcomes, some of these numbers do not have the same likelihood of occurring as others. A 2 and a 12 are very unlikely, whereas a 7 is very likely. In other words, the empirical probability law or formula doesn't apply when the sample space does not have equally likely outcomes. So this answer is incorrect. The correct answer is the one we got before, 1 out of 6.